We start off episode 14 with Grungelstan showing the twins and Zeus the bottomless pit. No pit in the world is more bottomless. He also explains that they are there to dispose of things they no longer want. Him disposing of suggestion letters for the mystery shack, Mabel disposing of love letters from Gideon, Zeus throws down his own shoes and a grill, because everybody's doing it. And when Mabel comes back, she's pushing a box in front of her that's locked with a padlock, and she throws that down the pit as well. Dipper, of course, is the only one noting that by definition it's impossible to have a bottomless pit, and Stan retorts, "Says you," while knocking on the back of his head, which apparently also seems to be bottomless. At least judging by the number of suggestion cards flying out of it. When suddenly the wind picks up, which Zeus calls an invisible pushing force. And because Stan keeps being stubborn and trying to get rid of all the suggestion cards, they drop into the pit. The goat! So after the intro, we watch the Pines family and Zeus drop into the pit screaming. And after they realize that they haven't hit the bottom yet, because they are still falling, Mabel decides to use a glow stick to shed some light. And apparently the hole is wide enough to not be illuminated at all. You can't see the walls, it's just pitch black. And because they apparently have nothing better to do and Stan chokes on a card trick, they decide to tell stories to pass the time. Dipper starts by telling the story about how Stan got them thrown into the bottomless pit where they spent the rest of their natural lives. And because this is such a riveting story, Zeus wants him to go on. Makes sense. But after Dipper got over his sass, he starts telling the first story. And this is where this episode will be a little bit different from the others, because we get multiple small stories in one episode. Again, as I mentioned, starting with Dipper's story called Voiceover. His story begins with Wendy, Zeus, and Mabel playing Spin the Pig. And when Waddles points into the direction of Stan, Mabel asks him if he has ever kissed a pig before, and he says he won't answer the question, which in my mind seems to be a pretty solid yes. Then Stan hides behind the paper and we can actually get a pretty good look at it. And the headline reads, "Reporter calls mom," or moms, and then it says probably pleasant, which is an interesting collection of words, but you can put together in your own head what that could imply. I leave that up to you. Shortly after, Dipper comes running in and says he got bitten by a snake, and Stan starts laughing about his voice cracking all the time, and Sue says that they even made a techno remix out of his voice. Dipper is of course pretty bummed about this, and so he decides to go back into town, where he meets the old man McGucket, who takes him through a dark and dangerous alley, by the way. That's his words. And to a little lab where he presents him with a voice-altering tonic, which he created because his own voice is pretty obnoxious, which he promptly demonstrates by making a kid run away crying and shouting after him that he can run, but he'll still be in his nightmares. What a great guy. Dipper takes the tonic from him and drinks it. And just let me really sum up this whole situation. A kid gets led to a scrapyard by a random hillbilly, random enough at least, and drinks a green liquid from a test tube that the hillbilly brewed in an engine compartment. So, Dipper wakes up in a van. Okay. Morbid jokes aside, how stupid and gullible do you have to be to drink this stuff? In the best case, this is not deadly toxic. In the worst case, he could have just dropped dead. So this is one of those classic Dipper only has one brain cell for a few seconds scene. Anyways, after a very familiar shot that we saw in the previous episode, Dipper wakes up with a new voice, which, by the way, is lent to him by A. Smith Harrison, who also voiced Webster in Disney Fishhooks and did the TV narrator in Rick and Morty. Dipper wants to wake Mabel right away and tries to do so by saying, "Who's my favorite Mabel?" right next to her with his new voice. And frankly, the reaction that promptly follows is absolutely warranted because it's super creepy to have a random voice saying that kind of stuff to you while you're sleeping. After doing a prank call to show and persuade Mabel that this is a cool new voice, Mabel still dislikes it. And when they go down into the shop, Zeus has a similar reaction, with him also disliking the new voice, mainly because he sounds like a weird commercial dude. Feeling that his new voice isn't properly recognized, Dipper decides to go out and find Stan because he thinks he will at least like it. And on his way through town, he actually meets the guy that he prank called, which turns out to be the bouncer in front of the bar. And what I ask myself is, how did he even get the number from that guy? Because when he's standing outside, he has to have a phone on him, meaning Dipper would have his private number, which just seems a bit odd in general. And because the bouncer recognizes his voice and doesn't believe him that he's just a kid, he wants to beat him up. And by the way, the bouncer has a lot more tattoos on him than just the head and chin tattoos. When we get the over-the-shoulder shot, we can see that it actually says over the shoulder, and he also has a neck tattoo saying neck. I don't know how these tattoos would be useful to him, at least, but maybe he always carries a mirror with him? Well, after Dipper makes his escape through a hole in the fence, he lands back in the scrapyard, where he confronts McGucket, saying that he wants a different voice, because everybody's basically scared of him or hates him. And while waiting for McGucket, he listens to the tape with his techno voice remix again, and in the end, he hears Mabel and Zeus saying that they actually like his voice because it's one of a kind. McGucket proceeds to hand him the new voice tonic, saying that this one should be permanent, and we see Dipper put it to his lips. But after I cut back to the shack, he talks to Zeus and Mabel in his old voice, and says that he dumped the rest of the, again, permanent voice change tonic into Stan's coffee, making him sound like a sassy diva. But coming from the crazy junkyard scientist, the tonic isn't permanent, as we can see when we switch back to them still falling. So now it's Zeus's turn to start telling a story, and before he starts we see Dipper spinning in the background because Mabel started to spin him, and he's actually somehow not hitting a wall, which seems to coincide with the fact that even the glow stick doesn't illuminate any of the walls, so this actually seems to be a pretty expansive hole. Zeus's really great pinball story. Is that a good title? Do they have to be puns or whatever? Story is next. Yes, that's the whole title. It starts off with the twins watching Zeus play pinball, trying to get the high score after years of training. And after losing another ball, Zeus gives in to the twins, saying that he should just tilt the machine to win. And when he does win, he says that it's the best moment of his life, with the old best moment being him finding and eating a pizza from the VHS player. And now the biggest surprise, who could have guessed? The pinball machine is of course cursed, and it zaps them into the machine itself. And after they enjoy a bit of fun, the head in the middle tells them that he will tilt them and start trying to crush them with pinballs. And to not get crushed, they hide behind the spittoon, where Zeus tries to woo a plastic cat out of a woman. And he tells the twins that there's a power button inside the machine, which he will try to get to while the twins distract Wild West Skeletor, who tells them that they will meet their maker, which comes back again in a later story, and that his maker is actually Ballway Games, which will also come up in a later story as the creator of another game. That we will cover when the time comes. And yeah, the skeleton head is easily distracted because he doesn't seem to be the brightest, and Zeus can get by him to the power button, but doesn't really want to press it because it would reset his high score. Though this mentality changes when Lucky Luke's head tries to suck in the twins, and Zeus finally presses the button, deleting all the data, including his high score, but saving them all. And he tells the twins that saving their lives is his new biggest life accomplishment. Of course, Stan thinks all those stories are bogus and decides to tell his own story about him winning the Super Bowl. Sorry, in this case it's the Football Bowl. Which of course never happened and is completely over the top. Very Stan-like. And after he metaphorically gets booed off stage, Mabel decides to tell a story, which is called Toothache. This one starts out with Stan trying to train a bear to drive a car, which frankly works a lot better than expected for a bear driving a car. That is until they get stopped by the police. Stan decides to lie to the police officers, saying that it's a seeing eye bear assigned to him by a doctor. And he's also faking a doctor's note, with the doctor's name being Dr. Medicine. What a stroke of genius. But of course the police believes him and let them be on their way when Stan says, "To the hospital, Honey Pants." So the bear's name is Honey Pants. Very cute. After they arrive back at the shack, Mabel tells Stan that lying is bad. And Stan's reply is, sometimes it's for the greater good. Which he promptly demonstrates by blaming Zeus for eating Dipper's spaghetti, even though he did. Hinting at the fact that Zeus likes to eat. And hey, don't do Zeus dirty like that. That's mean even for Stan's standards. And after confiding in Waddles what she heard from Stan, Mabel decides to check Dipper's journal for a solution, which promptly comes up. The truth-telling teeth, which of course also have their own page in the physical journal, but there isn't that much more on them compared to the actual episode. They are teeth. If you put them into someone's mouth, they are unable to lie. And the author mentions that he's not sure who created them, but he notes that he would be quite interested in seeing what his brother and mother would act like while wearing them. He also notes them as a weapon to use against deceivers, at least if they have no teeth, and that he tried them on for a day as an experiment. In said day, he accidentally made the mailman cry, and he notes that it's not his fault, he's abnormally hairy. And we already saw that mailman when Zeus mentioned them in an early episode. So now, Mabel sets her plan in motion, digs up the teeth, and switches out Stan's dentures for said teeth, wakes him up, and asks him who ate Dipper's spaghetti, which he promptly answers with him being the one who ate his spaghetti. Of course, she tells Dipper this while they are eating breakfast, and when Dipper asks Stan what he does in secret during lunch, Stan answers with he aggressively scratches himself in places he shouldn't mention. Yep, too much information. And of course, it's no surprise that Mabel's plan absolutely backfires, with Stan insulting a customer for his large teeth. Ironic coming from the guy who wears a pair of golden teeth. And he's writing down that he committed tax fraud. That paper gets promptly shredded by Dipper. And here we come to the weird part about the teeth, which is also not covered in the physical journal. It says that they basically force people to tell the truth, but it's telling the truth. So that shouldn't really imply that they have to, or that they would also write down the truth. Because he seems to blur out that the guy has big teeth, which seems like he can't really control it. And he also wrote down that he commits tax fraud. And I don't know how the teeth that would normally just influence what you say also make him write down the truth. So there's a bit of a gap in what the teeth really do. But I suppose that's part of the mystery. Through the text paper, we also get the confirmation that the show plays in 2013, because Stan is probably doing the taxes for the previous year. And in the previous story, I mentioned that the head in the pinball machine said that they would meet their maker, and in this story, they actually do meet their maker in the form of them watching a circus show where the creator of Gravity Falls, Alex Hirsch, is depicted on a unicycle. By the way, shout out to the Reddit comment from Hammer Hunter from 8 years ago, which I actually stumbled upon while making this video. So I can provide this information to you thanks to them. And of course, in a situation like this, Stan drops the existential anxiety-inducing line that they are basically just all biding their time until the sweet release of death, which the twins don't really take that well. And now, after this whole time of Stan telling the truth, blurting out things they really don't want to hear. They want to get rid of the teeth, just as the policemen come to the house and tell Stan that they found out that there's no Dr. Medicine. And after they ask Stan what he has to say in the matter, he tells them everything he did wrong. That he lied about the doctor, that he parks in handicapped spots, that he shoplifts fireworks, and smuggles endangered animals across multiple state lines. What a great guy. And not only the teeth seem to be magical, but apparently the house itself as well, because when Dipper goes down the stairs, the hole in the stairs just vanishes. But back to the situation at hand, Mabel realizes that lying is the only option and tells the policeman that Stan is just an author trying to method act his news character, thus saving the whole situation. And after leading them out of the door, she tells them good night, officers. But frankly, it really doesn't look like night. It still looks pretty bright outside. Of course, Mabel is pretty distraught about the whole thing because she thought telling the truth is the best thing you can do. But Dipper tells her she lied for the greater good. And now everything comes full circle because when they try to get rid of the teeth, Mabel puts them into a box that she pushes down the bottomless pit. And now back to the present where they are actually falling beside said box. After realizing that, Dipper also realizes that they are closing in on a circle of light under them, and we see them drop out of the pit opening again, but upside down. Dipper also mentions that apparently no time has passed. And some of you probably already thought about this. And yes, if you did, you are correct. There is a page about the bottomless pit in the physical journal. And there is some more information about the pit itself in here. The author also calls it the Mobius pit, which is referencing the Mobius strip, a strip that is connected in such a way that it forms an infinite continuous side. And he chose that name because the pit seems to impossibly loop back on itself, which we saw in the episode just now. He also mentions that not all things that are thrown into the pit come back out. Just something to keep in mind, because at the end of the episode, Stan chokes while leaning on the sign and falls back into the pit again. And even though the twins say he's gonna come back out, the journal says otherwise. There is a chance of him not returning, but of course he does. The author also made a drawing of what he thinks the pit might look like underground. And because some things vanish, he drew a little offshoot from the loop itself, which he called Holy Moly. I guess that's fitting. And he also mentions that maybe someday he will have the courage to leap down there, but that he might find himself on a plane of existence that he is not ready to handle, or, and now we get a reference back to the episode itself, that he just wastes 21 minutes telling stories to himself to keep him entertained. And with that, this episode of Mysteries of Gravity Falls comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a little bit different because the episode itself was structured a bit differently. And I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, see ya!